At my housewarming, my family kept laughing at my cheap neighborhood. Bet the walls are made of cardboard, my brother joked. Then my neighbor walked over and said, "Do you know who lived here before you?" "I still think it's cute you chose this neighborhood," Nathan said as he bit into a cracker, barely masking his smirk. "I mean, do the walls even keep out sound? They feel like they're made of cardboard." I didn't respond. I was too busy refilling my mismatched wine glasses, trying to ignore the way my mother's lips were twisted as she scanned the tiny living room. She muttered something about how she didn't know places like this still existed inside city limits. They thought they were being funny. But their words were like tiny, sharp needles puncturing all the pride and peace I'd tried to build in this space. A space I bought on my own. A space that took everything in me to believe I deserved. And then Mr. Pollen, my elderly next-door neighbor, stepped over to grab a drink. He glanced around, then leaned in and asked casually, "You know who lived here before you?" That's when everything began to shift. It had been less than a year since I signed my divorce papers. I was 46, and though I was the one who left, I walked away with next to nothing. The man I married at 29 turned out to be a magician of sorts, good at disappearing all accountability, hiding money, manipulating feelings, and making me believe for years that I couldn't do life without him. When I walked away, it was like stepping into the middle of a frozen lake, unsure whether I was walking toward land or cracking ice. I slept on a friend's couch for a month. Then I moved into a temporary rental that smelled like mildew and came with a neighbor who watched TV at full volume all night. Still, it was mine. My ex, Darren, called me a pathetic cliché for walking out. My mother cried and said I was throwing away everything for a phase. So I did what I could. I threw myself into work at a small Knoxville-based art supply warehouse where I'd recently taken a management role. It was demanding, but honest. I worked weekends. I saved aggressively. And when I saw a small listing pop up for a tiny bungalow on the east side of the city, I emailed immediately. The neighborhood was undeniably rough around the edges. Bars on windows. Some unkempt lawns. But I saw beyond it. The house was structurally sound, the street quiet enough, and most of all it was mine. No one could take it from me. No man, no bank, no judgment. The day I closed on the place, I sat on the bare floor and cried. Not because it was small. Because it was a new beginning. When I started planning the housewarming, I had second thoughts. But something inside me, maybe pride, maybe hope, wanted my family to see that I was okay. That I didn't fall apart. That maybe, just maybe, they'd respect me again. I cleaned every inch of the place. Repainted the living room walls a pale green to offset the dimming natural light. Hung up thrifted art prints. Refinished the old oak table I'd pulled from a Facebook Marketplace ad. I even bought second-hand wine glasses so no one had to sip from mugs. The morning of the party, I walked around the house barefoot with my coffee and smiled. It wasn't perfect. But it was safe. Quiet. Whole. That feeling didn't last long. Nathan and his wife, Marla, were the first to arrive. Marla politely complimented the vintage charm of the place. Nathan, though, was grinning like he'd been handed a joke on a silver platter. "Kind of small for a housewarming, huh?" he laughed, looking at the living room. "You fit a space heater in here with all the furniture, or what?" I tried not to let it sting. But he kept going. Tapping the walls. Making sarcastic comments about how it felt like a cardboard box. How the porch looked like it might fold in with a good breeze. Then my mother arrived. She didn't even try to pretend. She walked in, paused, looked around, and immediately sighed. "At least it's clean," she said. "Could use more light though. And less used furniture." Every piece had a story. The bookshelf I'd sanded and painted myself. The mismatched chairs I'd rescued from a church sale. The handwoven rug that cost $40 but had taken months of searching to find. They didn't see any of it. They just saw a small house in a bad neighborhood and a daughter who'd traded a house in the suburbs for what they saw as a downgrade. I was smiling through clenched teeth when my niece, B, tugged my hand to show me her coloring. She said the place felt like a treehouse. That it was cool because it wasn't boring. That small voice made something ache in me. I stepped outside to get some air, and that's when Mr. Pollen walked over. "Lively bunch," he said with a wry grin, holding a bottle of sparkling cider he'd brought over. I laughed awkwardly, trying not to let him see how close I was to crying. "You know who lived here before you?" he asked. I shook my head. He looked toward the backyard. "Single mother. Came here with 2 kids and nothing else. Husband left her with debt. This house was falling apart back then. She patched it all up herself. Took her years." My breath caught in my throat. Name was Delia Shaw. She passed last year. But I'll never forget her. Strong woman. Tough as nails. I didn't say anything. He just nodded and handed me the bottle. "Seems like strong women tend to end up here," he said, almost like a passing comment. But those words anchored themselves into my chest. It was a moment. One of those strange, unexpected moments where the world stops just enough for a small truth to settle in. They didn't see it. But I knew then I wasn't just rebuilding. I was continuing something. I went back inside with the bottle of cider and set it on the counter, brushing away whatever expression might have betrayed what I was feeling. My mother was seated now, flipping through one of the art magazines I'd left out. "This one's cute," she muttered, "but your place could use some of these colors. It's a little drab in here." She wasn't trying to be cruel, not directly. That was always her way, layering disapproval under the guise of observation. She never said I was a failure outright. Just that I could have done better. That if I'd only listened to her, I'd be somewhere else, someone else. Nathan was pouring himself more wine, already on his 3rd glass. "You got this for how much?" he asked loudly. "Geez, Belle. I know the market's insane, but you could have gotten something twice the size on the west side." I didn't respond. I just smiled and carried a plate of crackers and hummus into the backyard where my cousin Fallon had been sitting, thankfully away from the others. Fallon had always been quieter, more observant than the rest of my family. We hadn't spoken much in years, but when I sent out the invitation, she was the first to reply. "I like your house," she said simply, taking a cracker. "It feels like you, somehow. Like you could breathe here." That small sentence made my throat tighten. I nodded, sitting down beside her. Inside, I could still hear Nathan chuckling. I heard the words "neighborhood watch" and "good luck with the resale value." I let them pass over me like static, no longer interested in giving them power. Fallon nudged her chin toward the fence. "That old man who was out here with you earlier?" "Mr. Pollen," I said. "He's sharp. He told me this house had a history." I nodded. "Yeah. He said a woman lived here before me. A single mom. Rebuilt the place after her husband left." Fallon raised her brows, then smiled. "Makes sense. Strong women. I like that." Something settled between us. A quiet, mutual understanding. I didn't realize how badly I needed someone on my side until she showed up. Later in the evening, when most of the wine had been drunk and the food half-eaten, I stood in the kitchen watching everyone talk. Watching how my family took up space without ever wondering how it might feel for someone else to navigate around them. It wasn't anger I felt, exactly. It was more like recognition. Of a pattern I'd been too close to see clearly before. My entire life, I had been trying to impress people who never wanted to be impressed. Who never knew how to speak the language of encouragement or kindness. They only knew comparisons. Only knew how to measure someone's worth by square footage, by the car in the driveway, by who sat beside them at family dinners. And here I was, having broken away from a man like that, still inviting the same energy through my front door. When the last of them finally left, I closed the door gently and leaned against it. The silence that followed was so thick, I let out a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding since that morning. The house was still. A little messy now. A plate left on the coffee table. A wine glass near the windowsill. But it felt peaceful again. I went outside and sat on the small back steps, my bare feet pressing into the wood. The street was quiet. The kids were gone. The porch lights from other homes flickered softly. I looked up at the house. It wasn't fancy. But it was mine. I pulled out my phone and searched for Delia Shaw. It was a whim, but I felt drawn to know more about her. It took a little digging through old property records and obituary notices, but I found her. She passed the year before at 63. Her obituary was brief, but one line stood out: she was known for her strength, her resourcefulness, and her unwavering belief in starting over. I stared at that sentence. It felt like something I could have written about myself. Or at least, the version of myself I was trying to become. I kept searching. And that's when I found her daughter Nicolette Shaw. She lived only a few miles away. Ran a community outreach program and occasionally spoke at women's shelters. There were articles. Interviews. Photos of her standing in front of this very house, younger, the siding still unpainted, a tired but smiling woman beside her. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen. This house wasn't just a space. It was a chapter. One that had already held the stories of resilience and reclamation. One that wasn't finished being written. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to say, but I sent Nicolette a message. Introduced myself. Mentioned Mr. Pollen. Mentioned the house. How I'd just moved in. How he told me about her mother. I didn't expect a response. But it felt like the right thing to do. Like honoring the echo of someone else's strength. By the time I finally turned off the lights and curled up on my couch under the throw I'd knit that winter, I felt quieter inside. Not better. Not entirely. But grounded in a way I hadn't felt in years. There was work to do. On the house. On myself. On the people I let in and the voices I listened to. But for the first time in a long while, I believed I could do it. That maybe, just maybe, I already was. The next morning, I woke up to a reply. Nicolette had written back. It was a short message, warm in tone, polite, but layered with a kind of curiosity I recognized in myself. Hi Isabel, thank you for reaching out. That house meant a lot to my mother. It was more than a home, it was where she got her life back. I'd be happy to meet you sometime, if you'd like. I haven't been by there in years. Nicolette. I stared at the message for a while, rereading it 3 times. There was something so humbling in knowing I was living in the aftermath of someone else's survival story. I wasn't just starting over, I was continuing a legacy I hadn't known existed. I replied with a simple yes, I'd love that, and we made plans to meet later in the week. I told her Thursday evening would work best, and she agreed. In the days that followed, something inside me shifted. I started to pay closer attention to the house. The way the morning light filtered through the east-facing kitchen window. The creak in the hallway floorboards that sounded like a whisper when I walked too quickly. Even the stubborn back door that stuck unless you pushed the handle just right. It felt like I was learning the house's language, the way you do when you've committed to something for the long haul. The leftover bitterness from the housewarming still lingered, my mother's dismissive sighs, Nathan's mockery, but it had lost its sting. Not because I had forgotten. But because I had begun to see that they weren't judging me. They were reacting to something they didn't understand. Control. Independence. Reinvention. These weren't things my family admired. They were things they avoided. Fallon texted me 2 days later with a photo of an antique mirror she'd found at a consignment shop. Thought it might look good in your hallway, she wrote. I drove over and picked it up. She gave it to me for free, refusing to let me pay. It's nice to see someone in the family doing something real, she said. I always envied your guts, you know. I didn't know that. I still wasn't used to being seen that way. Thursday came quickly. I spent the day pacing, cleaning, and nervously baking a batch of lemon muffins even though I wasn't sure Nicolette would want anything to eat. I wasn't nervous about her judging the house. I was nervous because I wanted her to feel seen. I wanted her to feel what I felt when I read about her mother. At 6:30, she knocked on the door. Nicolette was taller than I expected, with a quiet confidence that seemed to rest just beneath her smile. She wore a denim jacket and carried a tote bag with books peeking out. I liked her instantly. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes taking in the space. She didn't say much at first. Just walked softly, pausing by the window, then the hallway. "I was 10 when we moved here," she said quietly. "The kitchen used to have wallpaper with roosters on it. Mom hated it, but she didn't have the money to strip it for a while." I smiled. There were still bits of wallpaper glue in some corners. I wondered what had been there. She turned to me, visibly moved. "I can't tell you what it's like, seeing this house standing, cared for." She would have loved that. We sat in the living room, mugs of tea between us, and Nicolette told me stories. About how her mother used to work nights as a security guard at a downtown office building. How she taught herself home repairs from library books. How she built the planter boxes in the backyard by hand and painted the trim herself every spring, even when her hands ached from arthritis. She was proud, Nicolette said. Even when we had so little. She never asked for help. Not because she didn't need it but because she was afraid no one would come. I nodded, fighting tears. That fear was familiar. I'd felt it often in the last year. That if I fell, there'd be no one to catch me. She didn't date much after the divorce, Nicolette continued. She always said that love was nice, but freedom was priceless. That sometimes, you can't have both. Those words hit me in a place I hadn't touched in months. I thought about Darren. About how often I'd convinced myself that being needed was the same as being loved. About how often I'd stayed quiet just to keep the peace. How I'd shrunk so gradually that I didn't even realize how small I had become until I left. When Nicolette finally stood to leave, we hugged. It was tentative, gentle, but full of something unspoken. "I'm glad it's you living here," she said. "Really?" After she left, I stood alone in the living room, my hand grazing the corner of the wall where the sage paint met the ceiling. I thought of Delia. Of Nicolette. Of all the women who had passed through this house with broken hearts and strong hands. And then, later that night, I received another message. Not from Nicolette. From Nathan. "Hey. So, I was thinking about the housewarming. Sorry if I was a bit of an ass. I guess I didn't know how to handle seeing you like that happy. I guess part of me thought you'd fall apart after the divorce. Maybe I wanted you to. Anyway. If you ever need help with something around the house, let me know. I owe you that, at least." I stared at the screen. The apology wasn't perfect. Not even fully formed. But it was more than I ever expected. I didn't know what to do with it yet. But I didn't delete it either. Something had begun to shift. Not just in me, but in the orbit around me. The house was starting to settle too. Like it finally trusted I would stay. Nathan's message lingered in my phone for a few days before I answered. I wasn't sure what I wanted from him, if anything. But I knew I didn't want to pretend nothing had happened. I'd lived too much of my life staying quiet to keep things smooth. Eventually, I replied simply, "I appreciate the message. Maybe instead of helping around the house, we could just talk like people next time." He responded a few minutes later, "Fair." After that, we texted occasionally. Nothing deep. But it was the first time in years I felt like I wasn't talking to a version of Nathan that had been built on sibling rivalry and condescension. It was like he'd finally started seeing me outside of whatever box he'd stuffed me in. My mother, however, stayed consistent. She called a few days later and began with, "I hope you're not upset, but I've been thinking." I cut her off gently. "Mom, I love you, but I'm not doing that today." "What do you mean?" she asked, caught off guard. I mean, I'm not going to let you undermine me under the guise of concern. I'm not sorry about my life. You don't have to like my choices, but I'm done apologizing for making them. There was a long pause. Well, she said. I suppose that's your decision. It is, I replied. And I'm proud of it. And then, for the first time in years, I ended the call without guilt. I had spent so much of my life shrinking around the people who were supposed to care about me. And the truth was, I didn't need their approval. I needed their respect. And if I couldn't have that, I could at least have distance. That summer, the neighborhood started blooming around me literally and metaphorically. I joined a local gardening co-op. I attended workshops at Nicolette's community center. And one Friday evening, she invited me to speak on a panel about starting over after divorce. I'm not really public speaking material, I told her. You don't have to be polished, she said. You just have to be honest. That's what people remember. So I went. I stood in a room full of strangers and told them about my little house. About how it felt like starting life barefoot in a storm. About how I had to unlearn everything I thought I was supposed to be. And about the neighbor who asked me if I knew who lived in the house before me. After the event, a woman came up to me in tears. She'd just left a marriage of 20 years. She asked if she could see the house sometime just to feel what a new beginning might look like. I said yes. The next week, I got an invitation in the mail. It was for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. Big venue, formal attire, the whole extended family gathering for a dinner. I almost tossed it out. But then I had a better idea. On the RSVP card, I checked will attend and added a note, bringing a guest. I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't flashy, but it made me feel strong. Confident. Like the woman I'd fought to become. My guest? Nicolette. Not because I needed to prove anything. But because I wanted them to see the world I'd built without them. The people who mattered. The people who showed up with kindness, not judgment. As we walked into the event space, heads turned. Not because we were loud or dramatic, but because we were unexpected. I greeted relatives I hadn't seen in a decade. Hugged Fallon, who winked at me like we shared an inside joke. We kind of did. Nathan was at the bar. He raised his glass when he saw me. I raised mine back. My mother, of course, looked as though she'd bitten a lemon. She's very statuesque, she said after I introduced Nicolette. She's a friend, I replied, smiling. And someone who's helped me understand that survival is nothing to be ashamed of. Mom blinked, unsure how to respond. For once, I didn't offer her a way out. At dinner, someone asked me what I'd been up to. I told them I bought a house. Rebuilt it from scratch. Helped start a support circle for women restarting their lives. Nathan, from across the table, said, "It's true. Her house is something else. She's done more with it than most people do with double the space." The comment landed quietly but firmly. People glanced my way with new eyes. I didn't need the validation. But it was nice. As the night wore on, a few cousins came up to ask about the workshops. One aunt pulled me aside and whispered that she wished she'd had the guts to leave her own marriage years ago. I left that party with a full heart. But the most satisfying moment came a week later. I was at home, sitting on the porch with Nicolette, drinking sweet tea, when a sleek black sedan pulled up outside. My mother stepped out, looking stiff in the summer heat. She walked slowly up the path. "I wanted to see it," she said simply. I hesitated. Then opened the door wider. She stepped inside, and I watched her look around in silence. The soft green walls. The handmade bookshelf. The rug from the community sale. My life, laid bare in furniture and light. She didn't say much. But at the door, as she turned to leave, she paused. "I may not have said it the right way," she said, "but I see what you've done here. And I know it couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I replied. She nodded, eyes lowered. "Still. You did it. That was all I needed. She left, and I stood in my doorway for a long moment after, watching the street. Kids playing ball again. Mr. Pollen watering his plants. A breeze rustling through my tiny garden. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and smiled. This house had once been the beginning of someone else's freedom. Now it was the foundation of mine. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.